A while back I got a comment on one of my videos from Andrea who said, "You are so into the Bandai WonderSwan that you have the crystal as your startup, yet I have never seen you even mention the Bandai Playdia." I knew that the Bandai Playdia was hot garbage, but it got me thinking enough to actually go order one from Japan so I could tell you a little bit about its history and give it an honest review. So let's get started with a little bit of context. Bandai was officially founded on July 5th, 1950 by Noharu Yamashina, a World War II veteran who knew almost nothing about the toy industry. Years of incredibly hard work drove Yamashina's business to the top, and by the 1960s, Bandai had created a very successful business model making toys of popular TV show characters. Despite his extreme success, Yamashina ran things the conservative way. Everything was well researched, controlled, toy lines could be shut down very quickly with little profit or material loss. By the late 70s, Bandai had begun to dip their toes into the video game market with a series of Pong machines called the TV Jack. In 1980, Yamashina's son, Makoto Yamashina, took over as CEO. He proceeded to do a bunch of really un-Japanese things, like firing most of the senior staff and replacing them with younger people. He aggressively cranked out toy lines, licensed new characters, and took on new projects. He was spending much more, but Bandai was becoming even more successful. Still, Makoto and his father butted heads constantly over the direction of the company. Makoto wanted to expand the toy empire into things like film, apparel, Gundam-branded computers, and, of course, more video games. Bandai distributed many foreign game consoles in Japan, like Emerson Radio's Arcadia, Mattel's Intellivision, and even the Vectrex. They also developed games based off of the various licenses they own, and created the Family Trainer, or the Power Pad as you might know it outside of Japan. But Makoto Yamashina was not satisfied to just distribute consoles and make video games. He wanted a console to call his very own, and he knew that he had the rights to some really powerful franchises. He also wasn't stupid. On the cusp of the next console launch were the two known giants, Sega and Nintendo, the soon-to-be giant Sony, NEC, and 3DO. Bandai knew they couldn't compete with that, so instead they worked on a console targeted towards young children, made in a joint venture with Asahi Kasei Microsystems. This is the Bandai Playdia. It was released September 23rd, 1994, and it beat both the Saturn and the PS1 to launch. Like I mentioned, it was intended for a young audience, as you can probably tell with this nice purple and green color scheme. It's got one wireless infrared controller, and that's it. That's all you got. There were no extra controllers, no simultaneous multiplayer, nothing. The games are CD-based, 33 of them to be exact, and every single one of them was published by Bandai. The games are mostly educational titles featuring popular series like Sailor Moon, Ultraman, and Dragon Ball Z. However, the CD format allowed it to play some pretty impressive full-motion video anime, even with the weak specs. Bandai showed off the console at the 1994 Tokyo Toy Show, calling it the BAX. Despite the fact that Bandai had the biggest booth of the show, the BAX was mostly ignored in favor of the much more grown-up and exciting Saturn. And this piece of junk cost 24,800 yen at launch, or about $230 US. Sounds like a lot, but thankfully much cheaper than the other consoles that came out at the time. But CEO Makoto Yamashina expected great things from the Playdia and interactive technology in general. In a 1994 Wall Street Journal article, he forecasted that the interactive component of Bandai's business would surpass its toy sales by $1 billion by the turn of the century. That would include the still-in-progress Bandai Apple Pippin, but he was still way off the mark. You probably guessed it already, but the Bandai Playdia was a commercial failure. In 1995, Bandai tried to salvage the console by releasing some interactive titles of Japanese idols. They were short, adventure and dating sim games aimed at adults and priced much higher than the educational games. Surprisingly, it worked well enough for Bandai to almost break even. By then, their sights were set entirely on the Bandai Apple Pippin, which had originally been announced as a computer aimed towards children. They changed their direction on that after seeing how the Playdia did in that market. And now it's time for some fun facts. The Playdia may have only had 33 retail releases, but there were 6 promotional games and programs released for it. 5,000 copies of a game called Yumi no Tokoton were given out as part of a campaign celebrating the Playdia's launch. In this game, you could play rock, paper, scissors and other little mini-games with Yumi Adachi, the little girl from the Playdia commercials. 200 copies of Go-Go Aquaman Planet were given out in an issue of V-Jump magazine, and there was also a catalog of 70s Gundam clips and items called the Bandai Item Collection 70. None of these are very exciting, but they are pretty rare. There was one really cool accessory for the Playdia. Sailor Moon Hiragana Lessons came with this really awesome light-up wand. It's super expensive and really rare, but if you're a hardcore Sailor Moon collector, it's a pretty neat thing to have. In 1996, leftover Playdia consoles were repurposed into kinetoscopes, playing anime clips for a small amount of yen. These were available to use in places like arcades, movie theaters, and even retail stores, but they were never sold commercially. Overall, I don't recommend the Playdia at all to anybody. All of its games are full motion video, and most of them are educational, and they're all in Japanese, of course. It's kind of neat to look at, but that's about it. And that's pretty much all you'll ever need to know about the Playdia, if you needed to know about it at all. If you like learning about the weird side of video game history, or just video games in general, please subscribe. Thanks for watching.